I don't wanna sit in a get with you, baby, tonight. I don't wanna love, I don't wanna fight. I don't wanna have to tell you all the things I know. I don't wanna stay, but I don't wanna go. I don't wanna be the lover in your arms. I don't wanna be the one to keep you from home. I don't wanna be the crooked person in your heart. I don't wanna stop, and I don't wanna stop. Part-time love, how we suffer now. And I don't wanna waste no more of your precious time. I don't wanna say that everything will be fine. I don't wanna feel your tears on my skin. I'm a coward, baby, don't let me in. Part-time lover, how we suffer now. So I don't wanna sit in and get with you, baby, tonight. I don't wanna love, I don't wanna fight. tell you all the things I know. I don't wanna stay, but I don't wanna go. Stranger traveling through this world of war. There is no sickness, toil nor danger in that bright land to which I go. I'm going to see my mother. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm just going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. And I know dark clouds will gather round me, and I know my way is rough and steep, but golden fields stretch out before me, where weary eyes no more will meet. I'm going there to see my father. I'm going there, no more to roam. I'm just going over Jordan. I'm just going over home. I'm going there to see my brother. He said he'd meet me when I come. Hush, little darling, don't say a word. I'm gonna buy you a mockingbird. Say, darling, say. And if that mockingbird don't sing, I'm gonna buy you a diamond ring. Yes, and I know that diamond ring. Yes, I know that diamond ring is gonna shine. Darling, if you'll marry me, I'll buy you a house with a big oak tree. Say, darling, say, we'll live in the house with the big oak tree. 3 little babies on your knee. Yes, and I know that diamond ring. Yes, I know that diamond ring is gonna shine. So hush, little darling, don't say a word. I'm gonna buy you a mockingbird.
Hello, this is it's Thumbs United. We are doing our creative stream, and we're working on the California project. I'm sorry, I'm a little tired. It was raining last night, it was really loud, and I couldn't fall asleep. I was so happy because I went to sleep around 11. I was like, yeah, I'm a normal person going to sleep before 3 or 4 a.m. Didn't work. I was still up, rather annoyed by the thunderstorm. But this is the California project. We're going to be working, editing photographs. I've already edited about maybe 50% of it a couple months back, but we're gonna try to finish the photographs, and then we might get into a little bit of video editing, but we'll see how long I go. The goal is to do 2 or 3 hours of streaming, so let's get to work. Do. So this is downtown LA, and I'm going to the last bookstore. I kind of discovered this new way of editing where you bring up the brightness and then you actually bring down the exposure, and it makes the photograph almost seem well, it makes it look brighter, but it's also slightly more high contrast. And then it's almost as though it's printed on glossy paper, kind of looks like, where there's a shine to the light. The highlights are brighter, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And we're just making kind of generic changes to the photograph. Okay. Now there is a way gonna synchronize the settings. I'm gonna wait a little bit for Lightroom to catch up. Now what's nice about synchronizing settings is we copy and paste the settings from that first photograph to all the photographs in this album, and then we can fine tune instead of having to redo each setting. And there's a little bit of fine tuning, but because I shoot each photograph kind of with the same style, it's easy to batch edit. Now these photos, it's right at sunset, and so the sun's going down, so it's really dark, and the ISO is high. It's not that high, it's ISO 400. You always want to kind of shoot at like ISO 100, and if you're shooting on film, you can even go to ISO 50. The lower the ISO, the more crisp and clear the image is, but also, and there's a high degree of detail, but comes with a price where it's a darker image. So that's the reason why if you're in a dark area where there's not a lot of light, then you would want to raise the ISO so that you can shoot in low light at night or in dark buildings. But the side effect is, because the sensor, it's the sensitivity of the sensor, and so if you make the sensor more sensitive, then it picks up a lot of noise, it picks up kind of blotches and all this stuff that doesn't look good. And so, yes, it's more sensitive to light, but it's a lower quality image, and that's not great. So you always want to shoot at the lowest ISO you can. Now, something you can do is if you're doing sports photography or you need high-speed shutter rates, where the higher the shutter speed, the more still moving objects are. There's no motion blur or anything like that. And so if the shutter speed is faster, there's a lot less light, because the shutter is open for a smaller amount of time. And so because of that, instead of being open, these aren't the real numbers, but if you have a shutter speed where the shutter is open for, let's say, 4 seconds, that's a super bright image because it's letting in 4 seconds worth of light. Versus if you have the shutter open for 1 second, then it lets in a quarter of the light compared to the 4 seconds. But there's going to be less motion blur because it's only going to capture 1 second of motion versus the 4 second exposure, which is going to capture 4 seconds of movement. Now, if you're doing 1 second or 4 second exposures, you're going to need a tripod. You can't hold the camera perfectly still for 4 seconds or even for 1 second. So most handheld photography, and 1 second or 4 second is like extremely bright. You would probably be doing that if you're doing night photography and trying to, take pictures of the stars or something. Night photography, you can have the camera go until 30 seconds of having the sensor open, and that captures a lot of light and will make the sky so bright with stars that it almost looks like daytime. Now we're gonna do a new synchronized setting and changing all the white balances. Now, the white balance is it's the color temperature of the light. Different light has different temperatures. That's what they call it. And so, you might notice that if you go from outside into a building with fluorescent lights, it's a different kind of light quality. And so cameras, your eyes adjust really quickly and kind of do like an auto white balance. They adjust, and like you can be in a room with a red light and your eyes will try very hard to compensate. So the longer you're in the room, the less red the light looks. The less red the whole room looks because your eyes are compensating. And then you'll notice that when you leave a room filled with red lights into a normal room with white light, everything will look a little bit more bluer, but as time goes on, your eyes will adjust. And so they're constantly trying to change that. But cameras don't have that. They can do an auto white balance where they just kind of try to figure out, but it's not so good. And I actually shoot in RAW. So what RAW does is it allows you to capture exactly what the camera sensor sees, and because it's not compressed in exactly what the sensor sees, it doesn't save a specific white balance. And so cameras, the white balance they have, like right now we have it set to tungsten, but they have daylight, which is when it's sunny and you're shooting outside. That's the white balance for that, which is a specific color temperature. Then the other white balance is cloudy, where if you're shooting in clouds, it's actually a different type of color. If you're outside and you're in the shade, that's a whole different type of white temperature, light temperature. and then tungsten, fluorescent, and tungsten lights they're the red lights. It's a reddish hue, and they usually used to be really bright, but they're slightly red. And then there's fluorescent, which is slightly blue, and so it compensates for that. And then there's the flash, which flashes also a different color temperature and needs to be compensated for. And so what RAW does is it captures exactly what the camera sensor sees without making any adjustments to the image. And so later, right now, what we're doing is we are fine-tuning what the camera sensor sees. And so we're able to apply whatever white balance we want to, as though we chose the white balance while we were shooting. And so that's really helpful. But in addition to that, we can do whatever white balance we want. We can change it to being, compensate to be more yellow, to be more blue. We can compensate it to be more magenta or more green. There's really a lot of choice we have. And so that's a big part of editing, is you want the most amount of data you possibly can get from an image, because then you can edit it and make it look better, and it's not compressed. JPEG is very compressed, and it doesn't capture exactly what the sensor sees, and it does that because it needs to be a much smaller file size. And so if you're shooting in RAW, that it's close to, for every megapixel of camera, it's a megapixel of an extra megapixel of storage. So if you're shooting with a 10 megapixel camera, it will actually be somewhere between 10 and 12 megabytes for one photo. If you're shooting with 18 megapixels, it will be somewhere between 18 and 20 megabytes per file, versus JPEG, which is usually under 2 megabytes per file. Even if you're shooting 18 megapixels, it's still gonna be, it might be 3 megabytes, but it's pretty small. And the reason for that is it doesn't save that much data from the sensor, and so it doesn't save exactly what the sensor sees. It says, okay, this is tungsten light, because that's what you either set on the camera white balance, or you have it on auto white balance, and the camera kind of figured, well, this looks like it's tungsten light, so I'm gonna set to the tungsten white balance. Auto white balance isn't that great. It's not easy for the camera to figure out what white balance it is. Because, like, for example, if you're in this room and you have all this blue and everything, it will try to compensate for that, because it doesn't realize it's a blue wall. It just sees there's a lot of blue in the image, so it will try to counteract that and make it more red. And so when it's JPEG and that's saved, there's no extra data for you to go back and fix that, so you're toast. That's all you can do. Is you can make adjustments, but it will be very noisy and the color quality will be really low, so that's not ideal. And then the other issue is, even if you're shooting 18 megapixels, yes, the resolution will be 18 megapixels on a JPEG, but it doesn't save the entire range of color. And so, like, for example, this shelf, it's a grayish white, and so JPEG will say, okay, well, it's a grayish white, but I'm not going to capture all the hues of it. I'm going to compress it, and since it's so close to being gray, I'm going to say it's about, you know, 2 shades of gray. It's light gray and medium gray, versus raw it will say the exact pixel color each time. And then in addition to that, what JPEG does is it says, well, these 5 pixels that are all next to each other are kind of similar in color, so we're just gonna save all 5 pixels as one color, versus shooting in RAW. Well, even if the entire picture is completely white, it will save each pixel at the exact color that it is captured, even though it's all the same. Versus JPEG, which will say, okay, this 1 pixel and all the pixels are white, so I'm just gonna save it as one color. And so that's what compression does. And so that helps save drastically on not just on file size, but it makes it easier for the computer to process. And the same is true with video. Okay, where the more compressed it is, the easier it is for the computer to play back the video and everything, which is why you want to compress your exports, but you don't want the footage you're editing to be compressed, or the photographs you're editing. And so this is a little bit out of Los Angeles. This is at this is Frank Lloyd Wright's son. Frank Lloyd Wright was a really famous architect, and he did several buildings like Falling Water and others which are really iconic. But his son was also an architect, and this is his son's work. This is the landscape around, but he actually designed this chapel, which is kind of an open air chapel filled with all glass, and it's really nice, like very nice and well designed. So this is the surrounding area. And that's the visitor center. You can kind of see the style is creeping in. There's gonna be these glass panes with these support structures, and they're gonna be kind of what is the word? Oh, here's the chapel. They're very rectangular, but not evenly rectangular. I forgot the word. It's like oblique or something. Oblique angles. And here's the chapel. You can see the structure and the circle, and it's all glass inside. It's in the middle of a clearing of trees, so it's really beautiful on the inside. And then this is the coast, right by the ocean. And then we're up above the highway. Actually, I would do these field trips with my grandmother. This was back in 2013, 2014, where I went to go take care of her because she just needed, more help, like cooking, and we did exercises and things like that. She was really quite incredible. Where early on in her life, when she was about 60 or 70, she had two or three really big strokes. And a lot of people, when they have strokes, they don't really recover, and there is a side effect of strokes where you get, really depressed. And it's kind of rightly so, because, you're losing control of your body, and a lot of people go downhill and never fully recover or want to fully recover. And so they pass away soon after the stroke. But she practiced every day, writing, working, and everything. And so what she ended up, she recovered very well. She needed a little help walking. She could walk, long distances early on, but she was a little wobbly. And so we would practice. We would go to the mall and just walk around. And then the nice thing about the mall is there's so many benches. So when she got tired, we just sit down. We would do these little field trips where we would go to parks and stuff and look around. So it was really nice. But she had dementia. And so it's back then in 2013, it wasn't so bad. We knew about it, but the thing about dementia is as time goes on, it gets worse and worse, and it does more damage, to the brain. And we're here in the chapel, and that's why she kind of needed more help, remembering to take medicine, eating, and so I kind of by myself helped to take care of her for the first year, and then I had to come back to Michigan to finish my degree, and so she wanted to come with me. So my mom and I took care of her for an additional 6 years. And we kind of did the same thing in Michigan, where we went to the parks and everything. She really enjoyed that, like, a lot. She loves to travel. And so just getting out of the house, like, she had huge time cabin fever, and I'm kind of the same way. And yeah, like, I know she visited every continent. She's probably gone to 80% of the countries in the world, maybe 85%. So she's always traveling, and she is responsible for much of my early photographs. She took us to South Africa, my family and I, back in 2007. And so those are some of my most iconic photographs. And I had just turned 17. We went around February 10th or 14th in 2007. My birthday is on February 3rd, so I just turned 17. And this is a small museum. I found it online, but it's actually a hangar on an airport, and it's really like a guy who collects all these airplanes and memorabilia. So it's not a full museum, but there is a lot of interesting airplanes here, which you're about to see. But yeah, so we went to South Africa in 2007, and I got a ton of really good photographs, and some of them went on to win awards. But yeah, I was 17 with that trip. And so before that, I was taking, photos, but mainly in the United States. There was also some Mexico photos. My family, we spent a lot of time in Mexico, where my grandmother originally is from. She's from a German family who lived in Mexico, and there was a number of German colonies in Mexico because they own these things called fincas, which are where they grow coffee, and they're coffee plantations. So her family grew coffee, and then she married my grandfather and came to the United States. And so even though she lived in Mexico, her first language was German, and then she learned Spanish because you kind of have to if you live in Mexico, and then she learned English. And so this is the incredible part, is that when she had her strokes, you forget how to talk and how to walk and kind of basic functions, and you have to relearn all of them. And so when she had her first stroke and she came out of it, she could still speak, but she couldn't speak English. She could only speak German. And so as time went on, it kind of speaking came back, but it wasn't English. It was first it was German, and then Spanish. She was able to speak Spanish, and then she was able to speak English. And the family dynamic was a little different because the age range, where my mom was born 10 years after the last child, and so my mom's siblings spent time in Mexico because my grandmother and grandfather opened up a hotel business and everything, and tried to live in Mexico, but they were kind of ahead of their time, and they had there were a lot of weather disasters, and they had to move back to the United States. So my sister's siblings all speak Spanish. They don't speak German. My grandmother never taught them German. But when they moved to the United States and my mom was born 10 years later, she wanted her to only speak English, which is pretty common for people who move from one country to the other. So my mom only knows English, and I only know English. My mom and I and two of my sisters are actually dyslexic, and dyslexia is something that runs in families. It's a genetic thing. But so we're really creative, and that's common for dyslexics because part of the problem with language and reading and writing is that it's character based, and you're supposed to process it. You see letters and you process it a certain way if you're non-dyslexic as letters, but with dyslexia you process it where you see shapes, and because we're very visual, we'll see shapes that our brain can kind of manipulate into different things, or it's not quite manipulation, but it recognizes two shapes as being really similar. And so an example of that is a lowercase b, a lowercase d, or a P, and those three are very confusing, kind of universally for dyslexic, because we remember the shapes, but orientation is difficult. So the lowercase d is the exact same as lowercase b, but it's just flipped, and so dyslexics actually process things in more of a 3D spatial awareness. And so if you look at a D, but then you look at it backwards, and then it's a D, and that's pretty universal with dyslexics, but it makes reading more difficult. And so one of the things we do when we're tutored is we learn to read slower, and for spelling we break things down into small chunks, into syllables, and try to sound that out. And so a lot of dyslexics work in media, or photographers, or become artists if they have the opportunity. But artists, it's kind of difficult to get into because there is a cost to it, and not everyone, kind of values the art process. And if you're struggling in school, you're not really going to make time for art, because that's the other thing. Homework assignments take 4 or 5 times longer for you, and it feels like you're always behind, and the teachers are getting grumpy at you, because most of them, even though they're in education, don't know how to help people with dyslexia. And so there's a lot. Not only do you have more homework, but if you're fortunate enough to be in a family that can afford it, you get a lot more tutoring. Like, I'm pretty fortunate, and from second grade to 8th grade, I had tutoring 3 or 4 times a week. So I would finish school and then go to tutoring for another hour, and then I'd have to do my homework, so it was really an all-day thing, kind of a big struggle, but it was worth it. And I think that's part of having to struggle. You really learn that yes, everything's difficult, but the longer you work at it, even though it's hard, you'll eventually be able to accomplish your goals. But it is 5 times harder to do basic things. And it's kind of funny, because when I work in media production with other people, when you're organizing shot lists and stuff, and file folders for editing, they kind of make fun of me sometimes, because they're like, "Oh, you spelled the shot list wrong," or I'll label it shoot lift. I'm like, "Whoops, that was a mistake. I'm not shooting anyone." Okay, so this is traveling to Northern California, and we're gonna take a short break, or I'll be right back. Welcome back. Now there's a lot more photos in this one. There's about 86, and it's the second to last one. The last one is 15 photos. But so we're definitely gonna be able to get to video editing. Video editing. Okay, I like that one because there's kind of a lot of range in the brightness. Before, when I used to edit, I was like, yeah, high contrast darks, bright, very vibrant colors, but the shadows were in complete darkness. Now I'm trying to change my ways where I edit, and I want more of a range in the darkness and the brights to be not overexposed, but evenly bright. And so this is downtown LA. We're on the freeway and driving past, and this section of photographs, we are going to be going up I-5 and up to Northern California from Los Angeles. So we're actually stuck in traffic. And I really have to apologize. I usually get somebody, like one or two people chatting in the chat room, and so I've come back to streaming this week. I started Monday, but I was like, this is weird. Why is... Because someone will introduce themselves and we chat a little bit. And I was like, why is nobody chatting? So I guess when I recently, I don't know, something happened in my settings, and I really never remember changing any of the moderation settings since I became affiliate. I was affiliate in this past March, and but the subscriber only mode was on, and I was like, no wonder nobody's talking to me, because well, of course I just got affiliate, so I don't have any subscribers. But that was embarrassing. I was like, because like a lot of times I'll do follower only, where you have to follow for 10 minutes, and that's just to kind of, it's not because I want people to follow to chat. It's because sometimes I get a lot of, hateful comments or kind of derogatory comments, and it's just, I don't want to have to deal with that. So, and it's kind of passive aggressive where it's like, okay, you're gonna say something stupid and and try to be hurtful, well, you're gonna have to work for that. You're gonna have to sit there, follow, and wait 10 minutes. And most people, if they're angry or whatnot, they just want to do it now and blah blah blah. So literally setting it to 10 minutes, they don't have the attention span to do that. And so they just leave. And so I use follower only mode. I don't use it all the time, but only when I usually use it when I do a rerun, or I'm live streaming produced content, or I'm not talking directly. I also have a new Discord server. I've been eyeballing Discord for a little while, but I was nervous about it. And so in my About page on Twitch, there's a link to the Discord, and you're free to join it. And I'm doing a little something extra, where if you subscribe on Twitch, I'm creating a private feed. There's a Discord channel for subscribers only, but I'm going to be making a section of my website for those people who subscribe both on people who subscribe through Twitch, and it will have early access stuff. It will have kind of some exclusive stuff, some stuff that will come out in years, and some of the things I'm editing on the side that kind of progress of things I'm not live streaming. So you're gonna get a lot of early access and okay, so now the photos have changed, where those other ones were taken at dawn. So now it's high noon in these photographs, and so throughout the day, the color temperature of the sky actually changes. So early in the morning, the light is it's more of a blue hue, and then so things are bluish as the sun starts to get up, but by the time the sun is directly overhead, and this is actually not so good, but as the sun is directly overhead, it becomes a bright white. But then as it goes back down and the sun is setting, it becomes a red, warmer color hue. So oranges, reds. So it starts off with blues, purples, and stuff in the morning. Then it goes to white, and then it goes to Then it goes to, yellows, reds, and orange. Okay, we're gonna synchronize. And so there's Southern California, but along I-5, outside of Southern California, kind of in the middle of California, and it's mostly all farmland. Now we are going up the coast. I believe it's the coast. We haven't gotten to Big Sur yet. That is incredible. When I had my learner's permit for driving, which in the United States, and it's pretty common elsewhere too, you have to take a class to learn how to drive. And so there's the stage 1. And so you take the class, and if you pass the class, then you get a certificate, and you take the certificate to the DMV, Department of Motor Vehicles, or if you live in Michigan, where I do, it's called the Secretary of State. And so you take that certificate saying you passed the class, and the classes, they're not government based, they're private institutions. And so actually the class where I took it was in Sears, but they are accredited, so they say you pass the class, you take that certificate to the DMV, and then they give you a permit, and it's just a piece of paper. And so that's stage 1, where it says you are not allowed to drive by yourself, but you have to get a certain number of hours, which is just like a pilot's license. And so you have to drive with your parents, somebody who already has a driver's license, but it's really strongly encouraged that it's a parent or your legal guardian, and not like other teenagers or something. I don't think it's allowed to be other people like that, but it could be like an older brother or a sister if they're old enough, like really old, like 20s, and you're 13 or 14. But so you get it's called the learner's permit. So you have to drive, I think it's something like 50 hours. And so we would do the road trips, and during the long stretch of, kind of nothing, my parents would let me drive. So it would just be miles, like 60 or 100 miles of just flat land. So, you learn how to do the long hauls. And So that was nice. So for part of, not this road trip, but in must have been 2005, 2006. We were going to Northern California, and so my dad was like, "Okay, Lloyd, you can drive." And so I hopped in the driver's seat and driving up. You know, I-5 is it's a very easy drive. It's mostly just straight, and all of a sudden we come over this hill, and my mom, who's very good with the directions, I mean, we say she's like a migratory bird, where she just has to go there once and she remembers the directions forever and all the landmarks and everything. And she said it's actually very important that when she goes somewhere, she does it right on the first time, because if she learns the wrong directions, she kind of learns it wrong forever, or she'll make the same mistakes. So yeah, that's interesting. And the reason why that's important to the story is that when she actually lived in California for most of her life, and she'd go up to Northern Cal and San Francisco quite often from Southern California. So we're driving along. I'm 14, and she's like, "Okay, you have to pull over, you know." It's time for, the adult to drive. And my dad's like, "Oh no, we'll be fine." And my mom's like, "No, you need to pull over." And so there was by the time my parents kind of stopped arguing, there was no place to pull over. So we come over this hill, and I remember, because you're driving through farmland, it's nice and flat, and there was this one hill, and you go over it, and all of a sudden you're on Highway 1. Now Highway 1 is one of the most iconic drives. It's one of the best drives, but it is also one of the scariest drives. Highway 1 is probably one of the most famous highways, if not in the entire world, but definitely in the United States, where it's on the coast of California, and it's in Northern California, and so it's extremely beautiful because you're on the cliffs, you're up high, and so you're at the mountainous range on the side of the mountain, which is scary because you have all these rocks and stuff that are jutting out, which, if they fall or move, or if you go too close to the right, it's only 2 lanes, so there's oncoming traffic in the other lane. And so if you're too far to the right, you could actually hit a part of the mountain, a part of the rock. So that's really freaky. And so then there's the right, which is oncoming traffic. The left, which is oncoming traffic. And then you have, it's just the cliff. It's just straight down into the ocean. There, like, if you go off the edge, there is nothing to catch you. So it is an extremely scary road, but it's beyond gorgeous. The mountain ranges, sometimes you go through forest. The bridges are incredible, but if you're 13 years old, you don't even have your driver's license, you have your learner's permit, I don't recommend that. But so I did it, and of course you're stuck. Like I said, there is the cliffs and there is the water. There is no place to pull over, especially if you're going up north and on the right side of the road. On the left side there are pullouts where you can stop and take photos, but there's not so much on the right left. So I drove it, and it's kind of famous for people to go kind of fast. I mean, like, it's a sport car area. But so people were a little annoyed with me because I was going either the speed limit or slightly slower. But you know, I was white knuckling it because it was like, don't go over the edge, don't even look at the edge, don't hit the rocks on the mountain. So that was my first experience with Highway 1. But I've been there again and driven a little bit as an older person, around 25 and 26, and it wasn't so scary. But you know, you remember that because it was just a hill, you know, flat land, farmland. You go over this hill and you're on the side of the earth. So that was pretty scary. But it is very gorgeous. And we actually have, I have what I call drive laps, where I take these really long videos. They're hours long, and it's mounted, the camera is mounted to the roof of the car, looking straight ahead. And so then I take that video, and using time-lapse technology, time-lapse methods, and it's a little more than standard time-lapse methods, but I speed it up. And what's different about when I do the time-lapse with video is you very much need 30 frames per second. I mean, you could get away with it 15 frames a second, but what I do is I compress the frames together using frame blending. So what that does is, normally when you do time-lapse, you would do a photo every second or every 5 seconds, and then you put it together in the video where that photo is played as a frame. So one photo is, so 30 photos is put together to make 1 second of video. So if you want to make a minute of video, that's 30 frames, and you have to do that by 60. So you need 120 photos to do 1 minute of time lapse. And so what I do is, but there's no in between frames. So if you're quite a large amount of time is in between a 5-second shot or a 10-second shot, especially if you're driving. So what I do is I record video, so that's 30 frames per second, and then I speed it up. So normally when you speed things up in the video editor, what it does is it just drops the frame. So if you speed it up like times 2, it will drop every other frame. So that will speed it up because it's only playing half the frames at an increased rate. And so what I do is I wrote a program that blends the frames together. So instead of dropping the frames and losing that motion, it compresses 2 frames together to make 1 frame. So it's still sped up, but there's a little bit of motion blur because it's 2 frames instead of just 1 crisp frame, and that makes the motion a lot more smoother and gentle and not jittery. And so there is a way you can do it with a media encoder from Adobe, but it is so slow and it's not reliable. When I originally tried the Adobe method, it's meant to do short clips, like a minute or 2 clips. But like I said, I'm recording 2-hour videos. And so for it to do that, it would take about 6 days. And it would, sometimes on like day 5, it would crash. And I was like, I gotta start over. So I wrote this really simple Python script which uses FFmpeg and some of the Python imaging libraries, and it combines the frames, and so it's still slow, but it's actually not as slow. It might take 12 hours to do 30 minutes, and so that's a lot faster than 6 or 5 days, and it doesn't fail. The only time it fails is if it runs out of hard drive space, which I'm very careful with, so it doesn't happen often. But that's how I do the time lapse, what I call the drive lapse photography, with video footage of driving around with the camera mounted on facing the front of the car. And so you can see that at Live to Tape, or that's how I get the footage for story time. And so we have a lot of drive lapse photography videos to edit. Not so much edit, but to color grade. And then this is a part of the area right here, and that's the Lone Tree. It's a really famous tree in Northern California because it's the last tree of its kind in California. So not only is it a lone tree, but it is also on the tip of a cliff, and it's just hugging. You can see it's just on the tip of the cliff and by itself. And so it's a very famous place to go take pictures and to see, and it's really gorgeous, and it's nice because you get a breeze from the ocean and everything. Okay, last 15, and these have all been 35mm. They're shot with my Canon and digital photography. So I'm pretty sure this is just driving from Northern California back down to Southern California. So this one's really dark. They all seem to be really dark, which will make it, because they're all so similar. And this one's dark because I'm taking a picture of the sun. This one as the template. this isn't. Okay, this is actually San Francisco. So we're continuing up. And so I remember now we were driving to San Francisco, and we were late. And so we got there at sunset. So there aren't a lot of daytime photos of San Francisco. And we were actually very much in a hurry. This was back when one of my sisters was looking at colleges, and so we were going to visit a couple of colleges in Northern California. Trying to find the right white balance. So far flash. No, that's not right. I think it was tungsten. And so, this is the advantage of RAW, where we can change the white balance to exactly what we want. Now this one is a very noisy image, so we're actually going to do some noise compensation, noise reduction, and then you can see this is what the image looks like. This is a higher ISO. This is ISO 6400, which is extremely high, and I don't recommend you use it unless you don't have a tripod. And see, that's the noise, and then when you turn it to the max, you can see it gets muddy, but the noise goes away. So you want to remove the noise, but you don't want to use the noise reduction at the highest setting. You want to use it at the absolute lowest setting you can, because it really muddies up. Like you can see, it almost looks out of focus, because that's kind of what it does. It blends the pixels together. And so the only time you really want to use a really high ISO, anything above 800 is high, and you'll get a lot of noise. But the only time you want to do that is if you're shooting at night or inside a dark building and you don't have a tripod. If you're shooting and you have a tripod, what you do is you can take a photo of it with a really long exposure, anything above a 30th of a second. You kind of need a tripod to keep the camera still. So you can do an exposure. That's when it has the shutter open. You can do 10 seconds, 30 seconds, 100 seconds. Well, there are ways to do 100 seconds, but you have it open for a really long time, so that lets in so much light that you're actually able to shoot at a low ISO of 100 and get so much illumination, even though it's like in the middle of the night, and you still get a really crisp image. The downside is anything that moves even a little bit, even a breeze in the trees will create motion blur, and so it'll either look like it's slightly out of focus or just motion blur. So we have finished. we have finished this. So I'm gonna take a short break. I'm gonna set up the next scene, the video editing. We're gonna start with editing 3D, the 3D footage, which is gonna look normal until we export it. So I'm gonna set that up. I use Blender Visual Sequence Editor. Blender is open source and free, but the learning curve is really high. I've been using Blender since 2005. Like when I was a kid, I always loved animation. I used Micromedia, and that was later absorbed into Adobe, where it became Flash. And so doing the stick figure animations and everything, that's what I learned doing that. And then I needed 3D animation, so things like Pixar films and 3D effects like spaceships and all this stuff in Star Wars, and character animations. I think the things like Maya and Lightroom are beyond expensive, and so Blender was open source and it had a really big community, and so there were a lot of tutorials and stuff. And so I started with Blender, and then I found out that Blender can do video editing, and I created a workflow and a system for editing with Blender. And I'll talk about that more when I come back. But I'm gonna set up, and I'll be right back. It should be like 5 minutes. So here we go.
Greeting and I have come to share this new series of visual audiobooks with you, the listener, the supporter, the viewer. Together we will go on a journey like never before, fly to new heights with Project Aerospace, explore new land and cityscapes with Photations, even change the dimension of time through the power of time-lapse photography from live to tape. We'll even travel beyond the mind's eye into worlds captured and generated through animation from Thumbs United Daily Animation Series. As we together go on these journeys filled with photography and theater of the mind, I hope you remember the core belief that we hold, that anyone can become the master of art, meaning that it is not some born skill what makes someone good at being creative. It is a desire to practice and spend time being creative that creates the master. I hope that these films, photography, and stories inspire you to set some time aside and practice some creativity. I believe if we all spend more time creating and being constructive, the world would be a better place, a more friendlier and fulfilling place. Thank you for coming. Let's begin this journey. Thank you for experiencing this journey we have created here at LCD Productions. For more information on how to support these films and projects, visit photations.com/support. Fine art photography prints from journeys around the world can be purchased from photationsstore.com, and digital downloads of our photography and visual audiobooks is available for personal use. Commercial use is available at a different rate. Thank you for your time. I hope to see you here again.
So here we go. We're in Blender. This is the visual sequence editor, and these are short clips. And what I do is I edit kind of by category and when it was shot. This teal is the audio, but the audio from the camera is never good because it's just like what's on the radio or something. Let's make this 5%. It's a little slow, mainly because I'm streaming. And so a lot of it is from inside the car and or listening to the radio or something. And so what we're doing is we're just keeping the footage of, kind of interesting things and where it's in focus and whatnot. So what I do is I kind of edit in clumps, and then once I do the visual audiobook or the documentary, it's all exported. The color grades are done, and so then I just have to line it up with the audio, and then once I export it that way, there's not a lot of computational work. It just has to kind of splice in the video. And the reason why I do it that way was mainly because how I do animation, or if I animate, I can do the export, and it will be rendering when it's doing the 35mm footage. It's rendering in 4K, and 4K is 8 megapixels, but the camera actually shoots in 18 megapixels. So it takes a lot of work, because even though it is at 4K, which is a higher resolution, it has to process the entire image and downscale that, where downscaling isn't so easy, and in order to downscale without loss of quality, that's even harder. And so I do bicubic downscaling, which bicubic scaling can go both up and down. It's really good at scaling up, and it's really good at scaling down, but it's computationally intensive. And so when I'm doing the animation, what I do is I animate as much as I can, kind of as fast as I can, and then I export it. And so then I'll actually be working on either writing the script or recording the visual audiobook while it's exporting, and editing the audio and everything. And then by the time I'm done with all that, it'll be done rendering. And so then I just splice in the audio where I have the animation as a video, and once it's as a video, it doesn't have to scale, it doesn't have to process the 18 megapixels. It's exactly in the right format, so exporting is very quick. And if I need to reuse animation, then it doesn't have to reanimate, where before, how I would originally do it, I would animate the whole thing as one big project. But then if I had to reuse a photograph, it would actually have to reanimate it, which is very difficult, very time consuming. So I kind of use this nested animation style. So what I do is we're gonna cut this up, and then we're gonna color grade and move on to the next one. This shouldn't take too long for this section. This is in downtown LA. We were going around, and it's actually Christmas. I believe it's like Christmas Day. And so there's this famous neighborhood where they go all out for Christmas and do all the lights and everything. And so that's where we're driving to. We were taking my grandmother there. She loves Christmas. You know, she loved especially the lights and everything. You know, she loved that all the time. in Michigan, there's this place called Bronner's, and it's kind of famous. Not so much out of Michigan. I mean, it is in travel books and stuff. But in Michigan, it's really famous because they advertise as Christmas 24/7, and it is a place that only sells Christmas stuff, but like high quality, really high quality Christmas ornaments, glass ones, painted ones, extremely high quality figurines, and but it's a ton of it. It's a warehouse full of Christmas ornaments, but it's not set up like a warehouse where it's unfinished ground and stacks of stuff. It is elaborately decorated, and it's so big that they have a food center and all that stuff. So it is decorated to the max, and it has decorations to the max. The audio is a little too low. And and then on top of that, they have a really big parking lot, as you can imagine, and they have this kind of drive you can do where you drive through all the lights. So they have all these giant light show type decorations and figurines, but they have it 24/7 every day, even when it's not Christmas. And it's in this place called Frankenmuth, which it's a very German area. Again, it's an area in Michigan where a lot of the German farmers came, and they kind of settled down in Frankenmuth, and so it's a very touristy area now, where there's a lot of the German breweries, German architecture, German type food. There's a really good place, especially if you eat meat. I'm vegetarian, so I wouldn't know, but it's called the Bavarian Inn, so you have to go there. It's really nice, and the waiters and waitresses are kind of like characters, or like they're dressed up in the German outfits. The beer ladies and the men are actually in the lederhosen. And so my grandmother loved it. They have people walking around playing the accordion, which she loves the accordion. And so even she had dementia, but in October we went there. It was towards the end, and so she wasn't quite all there. It's actually a long story, but she really wasn't all there. So we took her to the Bavarian Inn, and she loved it. Then we took her to Bronner's, and it was nighttime, and even though it's October, they had all the Christmas lights and everything, and she was over the moon. And so that was really cool, because she wasn't able to process a lot, but the things that she really loved, they were still in there. So even with the dementia and everything, you're still in there. And that's the thing that I noticed about mental health, is that a lot of people say like, oh, you're someone's depressed, or maybe they have schizophrenia, or they're bipolar, but they're still themselves. Like, even though they have all those things, you still have your personality and, your core being. Even though you may have all that. And so you're still there. Even though you're depressed and might not want to do things and everything's sadness, your personality, you have your own personality, and it does shine through depression, it does shine through schizophrenia, or it does shine through the dementia, but you still have the problems, if that makes sense. I guess what I'm saying, like, if you're bipolar, you have the symptoms and everything, but not all bipolar people are the same. Your character and personality is something, completely different. But yeah, she loved the lights and everything. So this is downtown LA. At night, this is again around Christmas time, and the reason why you can see so well in this, and there's a lot of motion blur, is because, and this is the thing that I love about video cameras, there's a difference between shooting with DSLRs, video, and actual dedicated cameras for video. And it's, yes, the DSLRs, they have more features, kind of. Well, they have more settings you can do, and what's nice is it's the easiest way to shoot on a 35mm sensor, if that makes sense. Which is, you get, it's a crisper image, you get more depth of field, things that are out of focus are very far out of focus, making the things that are in focus look a lot crisper and clean, and it looks really good to the eyeball, and it helps you create kind of a background, and then the person or the subject or the landscape or the flower that you're focused on is framed a lot better, and it's more, I don't know, it's ironic because even though there's more things out of focus, it looks more crisp and better because the things that are in focus are more noticeable. And so what I was saying about the video camera is that there's a lot more, it's more geared towards video. And so you have, basic settings in DSLRs when recording video, like you have all the shutter speed, the ISO, all the things you have with photos. But with video cameras, it has some of that, and it's difficult to set those. But it also has better kind of frame management, where it you can do things with recording that most DSLRs can't do. Just because with DSLRs, their primary focus is photography and photos, and so it's not that the video features are kind of tacked on. It's more that it's not a focus, and they're actually kind of not legal issues, but kind of legal issues with the categorization. If you're selling video equipment, like video cameras and stuff, it's actually internationally there are different taxes for different types of photography gear. So if you have a photo camera, the company doesn't have to pay as much taxes when they import or export the camera, versus a video camera, which there are a lot higher taxes when importing or exporting between different countries. And so the big problem is that photography camera that shoot video, the way they get around kind of the import tax is that, yes, they're allowed to shoot video, but they can't shoot long video. So video cameras, a lot of them have video limits where they're only allowed to, they can only record for like 15 minutes at a time or 10 minutes at a time. They can't shoot for like 5 hours in one huge video file, and the camera manufacturers will actually set it so that it can record about 4 gigs, have a 4 gig video file at once. And there's a reason for the 4 gigs, where a lot of Windows computers, by default, they can't handle, their file system can't handle a single file that's over 4 gigs. And nowadays with Windows 10, 8, and 7, they can, but originally they could not. And that was one of the features why a lot of video editors use the Mac, is because the file system can handle, you can have a file that's 200 gigabytes or 300 gigabytes, it doesn't matter. It's not an issue to the file system, and it hasn't ever really been an issue with the file system since OS X. Previously it was, but with OS X it wasn't an issue with their new file system. But so that's why a lot of cameras will limit their clip size to 4 gigs. So with like a GoPro, even GoPro does it, even though they're considered a video camera. So with HD, with the GoPro, it can record 30 minutes, and that will be 4 gigs. So it records in 30-minute chunks. With my Canon that records video, about 15 minutes is 4 gigs. So it does it in 4 gig chunks. Doodly doo doo doo. And so on top of that, so that's why different cameras record different chunks. It's for import-export taxes and file size limits of the computer. So now these are the houses. But the main feature, which is what I was talking about, the additional frame control, is the video cameras, most of them have the feature where they will actually, in the camera, blend frames, extended frames. So if you're shooting a video at 30 frames per second, with a DSLR, that means it's one frame at a minimum has to be 1/30th of a second. And with all cameras, you can actually shoot higher than that, So you can have each image be taken at 1/100th of a second, but it will take 30 frames, 30 images at 100th of a second. And so the motion blur will be, non-existent. It will be a very crisp image, and sometimes it can look fake because everything is so, so crisp. But with so video cameras can do that too, but video cameras can actually drop the frame rate. So even though they're recording at 30 frames per second, they have this feature where they can go beneath the shutter speed, can go beneath the frame rate. So you can have it set to where the video camera will take a shutter speed of let's say a second. So it will keep it will record, the sensor will record a second of exposure, which is something you would do for night. It makes a really bright image, especially in dark areas, but it will still save it at 30 frames per second. So it will be the same image, but at saved 30 times. Because with video files, you can't have a video file that starts off at 30 frames per second and then balloons up to 60 frames per second. You're allowed to only, at the way video files look, you can't have a variable frame rate. It has to be a constant, either 30 frames per second, 24 frames per second. You can actually set it to whatever random frames per second you want, but it has to stay that way. And so with video cameras, they can actually work around that, where they're still saving 30 images a second, but it might be a really long exposure duplicated over those 30 frames per second. So you can have it go down to it's recording 10 long exposures a second, but it's still saving that as 30 frames per second. And so you get a much brighter image, but there is more motion blur, so it's recommended you use a tripod for that. And then what is over? So there's more motion blur. It does look jittery, but at least you get some visual data, versus if you were shooting with a DSLR, you can do a whole bunch of things with the ISO. You can crank it up, but it becomes a noisier image, and there's a certain point where you can't get any more detail or any more brightness out of the video. And so that's an extra option you have with a video camera. Now I'm just talking camcorders and stuff. With cinema cameras, you have those options as well, but not so much with DSLRs. Now with DSLRs, what you can do, and they have devices that let you do it, and you can even do it when you're live streaming, is they might not be able to record more than 15-minute clips, but they do have HDMI out, and so they have these special capture devices for like cinema and directors of photography, like pro end stuff, where it will take the HDMI signal, which is usually, if it's HD, it's full HD, uncompressed, and it's essentially a hard drive that saves the exact signal at the maximum amount of bit rate, and it's even higher quality than if the camera recorded to the memory card, because the camera can only record as fast as your memory card can save. There's a little bit of a buffer, but not much. And so when you're using these capture units, you're saving the direct feed, and that can be, you can save like 200 megabits per second, where if it was going to a memory card, the max you could have, depending on the memory card, but it might be 60 megabits per second. And so that gives you a lot more wiggle room, like we were talking about before, where it is more uncompressed. You can do more color grading, you get a higher range of color, you get less noise, you get less muddy, you get a crisper image. And you can also, you can record as long as the camera has battery. And when you're live streaming, it's the same technique, where you can either plug in with USB if your camera supports it, which USB it's highly compressed, or with a capture card you can just capture the full resolution HD output from the camera. So that's two options you have, but most people do it through USB, and it looks fine. For live streaming HD, 1080p HD, you can either do the kind of range of compression is about between 4 megabits and 9 megabits. Twitch you stream to Twitch, and you can stream to Twitch at 20 megabits per second, but Twitch will distribute that stream. They don't say exactly what they'll distribute it as, and it's different if somebody's watching standard def or high def at 60 frames per second, or 720p at 60 frames per second. But so they don't quite tell you what their bit rate is for all the settings, so you have to guess. But they will never distribute your stream at 20 megabits per second. 20 to 30 megabits per second is Blu-ray quality, and they don't have time for that. And the higher bit rate you stream at, the more difficult it is for your computer to process and window capture and everything. So you want to have the stream come out at somewhere between 8 and 5 megabits per second. YouTube HD is around 7 or 8 megabits for 1080p. Okay, so now we chopped it up. Now we're doing the color grade. This will be easy because it's all night photography, so there's not a lot of white balance differences. It's all dark. And I've learned in Blender to do this first. So that looks kind of overexposed. And it's a white haze because there's no detail on the black. Once it reaches a certain level of darkness,